What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to a TEPPEN crafting guide. This time we are talking about the Force Seekers, and when I say we, I have brought in another expert and a good friend of mine in to talk about the game. He is a tournament champion. That is not an exaggeration. I have brought in my good friend Zenrotto to talk about what you need to craft for the Force Seekers. What's going on, Zenrotto?
Everybody, how's it going?
So Zen, we decided to take this in a little bit of a different direction. The last crafting guide I did on my own, and I did just legendaries. But when you and I sat down to talk, we kind of came to the consensus that a lot of the legendaries this expansion are kind of underwhelming.
Yeah, I think that's a problem with legendaries in this game in general, is that it makes sense to talk about the ones that you want the most, but then it almost becomes hard to recommend people spend so many souls on cards that are narrow in function.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and a lot of it has to do with that so many of the epics are just so good. A lot of the epics have great value from this set, which I think, it is great for the player because it's easier to get the more resources that you need to make the most optimal decks. But that's the reason why we decided, you know what, let's just sit down and come up with a crafting list that involves everything.
Personally, I think epics probably are more valuable than legends at this point. They make up the core of your deck most of the time.
And we actually expanded this into a top 10 because in our discussing of this, we're like, well, let's just do 5 and we'll do honorable mentions. But we had 5 honorable mentions. So
yeah, we started flowing out so many honorable mentions, it kind of defeated the point.
Exactly. So we're going to go into the top 10. This is how we feel you should be spending your souls to get the most out of them for the Force Seekers. This is all new material. So our number 10, I think, will surprise some people who are not used to playing this style of purple deck, and that is Rose. What makes Rose so good?
Rose has a lot going for her that even when the expansion first dropped, I was not very high on her. I thought she was not very good. But the more I look at her, I think she's really solid, and the timing of this video is really great because it's coming after the announcement of the Beltway nerf. So Four's decks just lost a piece, and now they need another one, and I think Rose can fill that really well. So her resonate ability is she draws a card into your EX pocket. So what that actually does, it has a lot more function than just drawing a card. So obviously drawing a card is good. But what it doesn't do, I don't see people talk about, is that it's an automatic power-up for Splendid Buffet. So just using it raw means that Splendid Buffet's damage is at minimum 3. Because she's always going to draw a card into your EX pocket when you use it, which means that you're automatically going to heal minimum 3 with it. I think that she speeds up the consistency of your deck. She's only got 1 health, but she comes with an automatic shield, so barring any shenanigans, she's doing 6 damage to someone in the lane before she dies. And she powers up one of your better minion damage cards, and she gives you some lifesteal. I think she's a low-key, very solid unit.
And what some people are doing is they're kind of tailoring their decks to be a little more limited in the action cards than the average purple deck runs, because a lot of purple decks, at least, not all of them, but a lot of them typically are action heavy. You've got negates, you've got the foresights to draw things to your hand, Splendid Buffet, like you just mentioned. There's a lot there, but what I've seen some Rose players do is they will trim down the number of actions they could potentially draw, so they get their big board-changing actions from Rose being triggered, like Brainwash or Into the Void. It's Into the Void, right? Isn't that what it's called?
You talking about Soul's Return?
Thank you. I don't know why I want to call it that. Soul's Return, which bounces everything on the board. So I think there's a lot of application here, and I think people are sleeping on this card a little bit.
People aren't going to want to hear this because everyone hates this card, but she's also really good at setting up a very powerful Surge of Demonic Power.
She is. And when I say people are sleeping on her, there are some really smart players who aren't. Ryuzu's been using her pretty much since the get-go, and, Ryuzu's a god. He got 3rd place in World, so...
Right. Yeah, even if you didn't like her before, now that Beltway is still, okay, but he's a lot for his cost now. I think Rose is a really great option to stand in for what he did before.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, 100%. So number 9 on this list is something that may surprise some people, and that's Call to Battle. And, this is kind of a yawn staple, and other green decks can use it, but in my mind, it's not nearly as effective because for this card to be good, you need a lot of extra MP generation, which is what yawn is. This yawn's bread and butter. It's what they do. But for those of you who aren't familiar, it's 3 MP to place 1 green unit from your deck into the EX pocket. It gives that unit +1/+1 for each time friendly green units have had the Ascended status this battle. So naturally, when you do this in a yawn deck and you get this late game, you're going to be pulling a powerful creature into your EX pocket. And I've seen buffed Heavenly Kicks Chun-Li's. I've seen insane Irises that are very difficult to kill. I think there's a lot of value in this card.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really good card. I know there's some complaints that the card is a little on the slow side, and I kind of agree with that. I think that it is a little slow if you're trying to play it in, say, Mega Man or Nero. But when you're playing it in Chun, nothing's slow. She's basically turbo mode, the game.
Right.
I think it's incredible in a Chun decks. Even if you don't have that many Ascended boosts, getting 3 attack Iris with, 9 HP, automatically makes the card worth it.
Yeah, there's potential to have a lot of value here, and you're exactly right. You wouldn't run this in X. Like, you wouldn't run this in Heart Tank. You wouldn't run this in Nero. It's just not going to be fast enough to... You're not going to get it and have the MP to really get the value out of taking the time to spend the 3 MP to fetch something. But with Yawn, you have all the MP in the world. Granted, you're playing it correctly, which isn't that hard. So yeah, I think Call to Battle
is the most difficult thing in the world.
No, it's kind of a potato deck, but I digress. So I think it's a solid choice for number 9. Number 8, I think, is another one where people will be like, why is he so low on this list? He's so good. And we'll get to that. And that's Infernal Magma Dragoon, which he has a ton of effects. I think he works really well in almost any red deck, but why don't you explain the reasoning for why we've put him below some other cards on this list?
The reason that I have Magma Dragoon down this low, because I think you originally wanted a little bit higher. I kind of pushed that he should be a little bit lower.
I did, but I'm a red player at heart, though, so I'm always going to be a little biased.
Maybe we should have leaned more toward your expertise on this one. But
no, it's fine. I understand it, and if you don't dip into red, you're not going to see the value of this card.
I just find his application very narrow. I think he's a good game finisher. But, I mean, so is Fate Defying Ryu. I think that he has a lot of slots that he's competing with other cards, because Red has a lot of staple cards that it wants multiple copies of. And so, at least to me, when I'm looking at Ryu decks, I feel like he's fighting for a lot of space against better cards that he will not necessarily beat. I think he's really good in stuff like Mono Red Rathalos. I think he's really good in the Metsu Shoryuken kind of decks that are sort of around, not like crazy, but when I think red, I think Shinku Hadoken, and when I think Shinku Hadoken, I don't think Magma Dragoon, is basically my thinking.
That's understandable. Totally get where you're coming from with that. And the comparison to Fate Defying Ryu is really interesting to me, because I was tweaking my Ryu deck this morning for a deck guide that may or may not already be out by the time this video comes out. It probably won't be. But I actually came down to the decision of removing Fate Defying Ryu from the deck and keeping Infernal Magma Dragoon. And I actually don't regret that decision.
Interesting. See, I think I would have gone Ryu in that scenario, but I'm interested to see how that works out.
Well, Ryu is really good, and I think that you could easily... the choice, it wasn't so much between the two of them, because in my mind I was always going to run Magma Dragoon because he's so scary, and like you mentioned, he can close games very easily. It was more of a, how can I get a little bit more Ascension in this deck so that I don't end up in situations where I'm board locked and can't do a damn thing. Because there's only 3 actions in the entire deck, and the reason there's not 4 is because I don't own Liberating Slash. So that's kind of where I am with that, but I don't hate the decision. So yeah. But speaking of red, I'll let you intro Ryu for number 7. How about that?
Well, there you go. Number 7 is Ryu, the new red epic that ascends into Evil Ryu. When you play him, he's a 3 damage into anyone, so basically he is an Agnactor. He just hits a random enemy on the board for 3 damage. And then if you ascend, he also turns into Evil Ryu, who I believe is a 4/8 body. And
Correct.
When he deals direct damage to the opposing hero, he mills 2 of your cards. Personally, I was really down on this card
We
when
all were.
the expansion got released.
Yeah, when that card came out, when we did our little card review, when we all sat down together, we're like, nobody's going to play this. This is garbage. Why would you want to intentionally mill?
I was really down on him. I openly eat crow. He's really good. He's a big body. He can hold basically any lane. Like, it's really tough to get through Evil Ryu. Even big threats have problems breaking through him. So, I mean, technically, you can kind of play around it by, like, letting him hit your face and mill your deck if you want. But, like, who can afford to do that other than maybe Morrigan, you know? I really think this card is strong.
I agree with you, and I think the thing that was holding me back personally from being like, well, I guess there is application for this, and that is, don't be afraid to ascend over an Evil Ryu again for something different. And you definitely want to keep that in mind, because you obviously don't want him milling your entire deck. In my mind, I wouldn't want him milling more than 2 swings. And when I say mill, I mean that's pulling cards out of your deck. That's an old trading card game terminology for those of you who haven't heard it before. But don't be afraid to ascend over him again. And that's kind of the way I've looked at it. You get easy ascension triggers from him, which less opportunities for you to be board locked. So all around, I think he's solid. I wouldn't run 3 if you're going to run Shinko, Hadouken, Ryu. I'd run 2, but that's just me.
I've seen 3. I think you can run, because you don't necessarily have to ascend him if you don't want to in red.
Correct.
He's expensive for what he does, but I think he's valuable. Also, a little aside before we move on, I've seen some people running him in a black-red Raging Demon deck.
That's interesting.
That is designed around just making that lane pretty much impossible to get through. So they drop the regular Ryu, let him pump the 3 damage on the board and hold the lane because he has a decent body. And then as he gets close to dying, you ascend the lane, he breaks it, and then he's Evil Ryu. So again, that lane is occupied. It's interesting.
That is really interesting. I have not seen this, but I want to. I now want to see it. But interesting idea. But yeah, especially if you're a red player, I mean, there's value in having these Ryu. He's good. We definitely kind of have to walk it back a little bit on what we initially said.
Absolutely.
So number 6 is another surprise, I think, for some people, and this is definitely a card I had to come around on too, and that is Master of the Fist Akuma. And he's very, very expensive, and I think that's something that scares a lot of people away. I mean, it's a legendary Akuma, so it's got that cool factor going for it. But, 8 MP right out of the gate for a 6/3, that's a terrible stat spread. But you also get the bonus of destroying the unit in front of it with no chance for them to be reacting to it because it's a when played effect, which is super good. And I personally have found more application out of this Akuma being unascended than I have when he is ascended. Because when he's ascended, he's Demon God Oni, and he has a victory of he destroys a random unit with an MP cost of 4 or less, but after a friendly unit is placed on the field, that unit gets destroyed. So until he goes away, he locks your board, but he's an 8/11 if he's ascended. So something to keep in mind.
I think this card is incredible. Personally, back when it came out, this is another one where I was like, he seems okay, but he's expensive, and he is really expensive. But one, an unreactable kill. You can't do anything about it. He's a Sitsuyaku of murder. You can't do anything about him. And then Oni, I think, has a lot of neat combo plays that enough people don't mess with. Like, I think Oni really frustrates Chun, and I think Oni really frustrates Morrigan. Because if you're up against the Chun, automatically the cat and Lair are in range of getting popped by Oni's victory effect. And at 8/11, anything in the opposing lane is losing to him. So then they're both in range of getting popped. They also get insta-killed by dropping a tyrant on your board while Oni is out, and Oni insta-kills the tyrant and wipes the entire opposing board of 1 attacks. So even if they try to stack shielded stuff like Layers and Irises on the board while you have Oni out to make a counterplay, if you drop a tyrant right there, you've just wiped everything they've got.
Yeah, that's
and then
a
Morrigan
very fair point.
Yeah, Morrigan is just kind of no matter what, he can pop pretty much everything I have in my deck that's not a Tigrex, and he can still body the Tigrex. So right over top of him whenever you don't want him anymore with Alexia. You can fodder him with Predation to get some health back. You can pop him with Mad Massacre. There's a lot of ways for black to get units off their own board. So I don't think that a Oni can ever really put you in a bad spot to the point where you can't play anything unless you get really unlucky.
Which can happen, because I found myself
happen.
in that situation a couple of times. Not so much lately, but I think that just kind of goes into, people understand more about what this expansion brought to the game and are now building decks better. And that just comes with time.
And I also think he's not a guaranteed ascension. I think part of using him is knowing when to and not to bother ascending him.
Exactly. Because, getting a free destroy off of any cost of a unit is pretty good for 8, especially considering they can't react to it.
Yeah, it ignores Veil. Like, there's a lot of ways you can build up a big threat, and none of those ways prevent them from dying to Akuma.
Yep. And you get a body off of it, too, which is never a bad thing. Zen, tell us about number 5.
Number 5 is Betrayal, which is a new destruction card in black that is... I see a lot of debate about it between it and Obliterate. I think the healthy thing to do is run a little bit of both. What it does is it only destroys up to 6 MP. So 7 MP and higher, it cannot hit it. But when it hits a 6 MP or lower unit, it destroys the unit and it pulls any copies out of the opposing deck. So let's say you're fighting against Chun and she drops Iris. You hit that Iris with Betrayal. Unless she has more Irises in her hand, all of the ones in the deck are gone. It's a really powerful tool for a lot of matchups to just kind of neuter what they want to do. Like, it hits Huitzil, it'll pull Huitzil out of decks. It hits a lot of good cards. Because you think about how many cards in the meta right now are cost 7 and higher, and there's really not that many.
There's not many on this list.
Tigrex, maybe, you've got Akuma, but like 7 and higher cards you just don't see that much of.
Yeah, it's risky to play on that kind of a curve.
Right. And I think that because you do see some, that's why I would say Betrayal and Obliterate you kind of mix and match, because it would suck to be in a situation where you've got triple Betrayal and all of a sudden the opponent drops whatever, Legendary Nero, and now you have no reaction to him,
Exactly.
But it's just not common enough to make Betrayal a bad card by any means. Plus, it gives you a little hint about what your opponent might have in your hand, because you can see the number in their deck go down. So if it's a staple, they most likely have at 3, like, say, Iris.
Yes, and it also, along with the number, there's actually a little animation, and you can see if there are cards being pulled from the deck. It's right above the hero, and it may be really easy for you to miss. They
fall into a little void thing.
Yeah, like they just kind of fade away. So something to keep in mind. But yeah, Betrayal's got a lot of application, especially right now where there's a bunch of units that are below that 6 cost curve that see a ton of play. So number 4 is... It won't surprise anybody that this card is on this list because it's everywhere. If you are playing green, even if it's a dual color deck, more than likely this guy is in your deck, and that's Rainy Turtloid. He's a really cheap ascension unit that gives you a ton of value. If you ascend off of him, it's 4 MP for a 4/10 with spillover, and that's really, really scary. It enables for potential board clears in a lot of ways. Even if you play him raw, he's still a big body. He's low cost, so he can fit in dual color decks. If you pulled Rainy Turtloid, you're going to get a lot of value out of him, especially if you like anything with green in it.
I don't really see a lot of downside to Turtloid, because even if they reset his attack or whatever, if you're playing a green mirror, he's still a 10 health body. He's still going to hold that lane down for at least a few hits. No one's going to just nuke a 10 HP body.
Yeah.
He's a 4 mana cost for 4/10. Even ignoring the spillover, a 4 mana 4/10 is crazy. He's really good.
Yeah. And if he gets, and a lot of times what happens is he gets softened up quite a bit throughout the course of a fight. And then all you really have to do is just ascend over him again. And he's good ascension value. It's just all around if you're going to play green. And he's not a guy where you're like, oh, I can do 1 or 2 off. Like 3 Rainy Turtloid is a good thing.
I would definitely play Turtloid at 3 whenever you can.
For sure.
Number 3, Alexia Ashford, who happens to have one of the best secret arts in this game, in my opinion. Super dominant card. You see her in basically I don't think I've seen a black build that doesn't have her in it, other than maybe Ouroboros. And even then, I think I've seen a couple Ouroboros builds with her in it. Her value is just through the roof. She's got a decent-sized body, but her Ascended effect is an instant kill on a random enemy minion with an NP cost of 5 or lower. So this means she pops Iris, she pops Heavenly Kicks Chun-Li, she pops so many good cards. You know, most Ascension units in green, other than like Huitzil. So she'll break Turtloid, she'll break Rikuo.
Desert Hunter Diablos.
It's hard
if
to
they're still
react
playing
to her.
it. Yeah, and
Diablos G.
Yep, G. And a lot of situations where you get tons of value off of her, and it's a dice roll. I mean, it's a dice roll when you do this, but if you play an unascended Alexia Ashford and you activate Raging Demon with Akuma, you're not only triggering the death effect for the unit in front of her, but also potentially another unit. So you can get so much value off of her, and the cost being so low at only 5 just makes her application so broad. And I also agree with you on the secret artwork. It's awesome. Probably my favorite of this new set, and she's just really good, really good.
You can actually force her to get the double pop on Raging Demon if you get lucky and your opponent has one that is over her limit and one that is under. So let's say the opponent has a Turtloid and a Huitzil. If you drop her in front of the Huitzil and Raging Demon, you guarantee that you'll clear both.
Yep, that's a good point. So yeah, you can get a lot off of Alexia Ashford, and if you like playing Raging Demon, if you want to tinker around with that hero art, I would highly recommend you get yourself a set of 3 because she is worth having a trio of.
I would co-sign 3 as well. I think you can even run her at 3 in Wesker.
Totally.
At least 2, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, you can run her in DD all day or Dark Destruction, and get lots out of it. So I agree with you 100%. So now we're into the top. That was actually number 3. So now we're in the top 2, and these shouldn't surprise you when we get there. But number 2 is definitely Huitzil. This is a really insane unit when you sit down and break down what it is that you get out of it, especially when it's ascended for just 6. The value of this unit is so good, and with Yawn being as prevalent as it is, making it so easy to generate tons of MP, it's easy to get tons of these guys, and you are forced to either destroy it with something big like Obliterate or Betrayal, or you just have to throw bodies at it because it's got a lot of health and it comes with a shield. It's scary, it's got tons of application. Huitzil's just great all around.
Huitzil is one of the cards I want to see the least in the game right now. I hate coming up against him. A 6/8 body with a shield. I mean, even non-ascended, he has some application in dealing with aggro decks, just because you can't fly over his head.
Yeah,
this is one of the only units I know of with innate anti-air other than Ken. He's just strong. He's strong. He's cheap for what he does. I mean, even if you're not playing Chun, I still think you have to use this card in green, no matter what, if you're running mono green.
Oh, you definitely do. You definitely do. Not having Huitzil is more of a gimp on green, mono green, that is, than anything. It's just really good. There are units that cost more than Huitzil that don't give you nearly as much of the benefit.
Oh yeah,
and that's for all. That's for all colors. So, yeah, Huitzil's fantastic.
There's just very few cards or like minions that could deal with him appropriately. The only ones I can think of off the top of my head are like the purple ones that negate all damage down to 1 no matter what. Like Oro will trade into Huitzil, which is a good play for purple, but like that's one guy, you know?
Yeah. So number 1, and this shouldn't be any surprise to anybody, but number 1 is the green legendary Ultra Lady Karin, who is incredible, amazing, fantastic, superlative. She is a 5 cost to, I don't remember what her raw stats are because I only ever play her
10, I believe.
No, that's the ascended number. Hold on just one second and I'll pull it up.
Ascended, she's a 4/10.
Correct. Okay, so I'll just make a little snippy there when we edit this. Ultra Lady Karin is a 5 cost 2/8 with agility, but if you ascend with her, she gets +2/+2, and she inflicts seal on the unit in front of her.
You realize she gained health as well.
Yeah, she gains health as well. I mean, you give this girl Ascended. I mean, she's swinging for 4 so fast, and she's got the body to sit there and chew through units like there's no tomorrow. This is what I used my legendary crafting discount for the season pass on. I don't regret it whatsoever. You can use this in any deck that has green. You can throw this in there, and you will always be happy to draw into it.
I bring her in any deck I use that has green in it. If it's a hybrid deck, if it's a mono deck, it doesn't matter. I bring this card. A 4/10 with agility, and then she also has the Tsitsiaku unreactable seal. Doesn't matter what your opponent does. The seal is on. Like, Karin kind of single-handedly shoved Rezo out of the meta. Like,
yes,
she's just insanely dominant. She's the best card in the set, in my opinion. One of the best cards in the whole game, in my opinion.
Yeah,
there's no downside to her. Even if you don't ascend her, like for some reason you can't ascend her, she still has agility. So she's still a body that the opponent has to deal with. You can't just ignore her.
Yep. I would say that she is easily top 3 of all legendaries in the game. And I would say top 3 of all cards in the game. I'll even venture to say that. Just so much application. With seal being so valuable, it is a super easy seal to land. It's cheap, and you get a very scary body along with it. I mean, you can't not love this card.
There's nothing I can think of off the top of my head to complain about with this card. Not a single thing.
The only complaint I could think of is if you're playing a match and this thing gets dropped and seals one of your guys, and you're like, oh man, I hate that card. But deep down, you really love it because you also play it sometimes too, and it's just that good.
I'll co-sign that. I've definitely said that a few times myself.
So there you have it, guys. That is our top 10 cards that you should consider crafting for TEPPEN, specifically for the cards that came out for the Force Seekers. Zenrotto, thank you so much for joining me and helping me break down this list because it was much easier to bounce ideas off of you. Where can people go to find all the wonderful content that you create?
So you can check me out on Twitter at Zenrotto, and then you can also check me out on YouTube at the same name, and occasionally on Twitch at the same name. I'm very easy, just one name everywhere you go.
Easy to track down, and you should go track him down because he's a good dude and he makes good stuff. So thank you guys very much for hanging out for this crafting guide. I hope that this is helpful to you. If it is, you should definitely consider subscribing. What do you think of our list? What did we get right? What did we get wrong? Let us know in the comments. I definitely go and read and try to respond to every single one. Appreciate you guys for all that you do. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Hey, everybody.